Uh, Today, my task is to moderate a very important session. It is one of our keynote speakers' presentation or the speech. But before I start, I would also like to, on behalf of MNU, welcome you all again to the Theveli 2025 International Conference. Before we continue, let me take this pleasure and opportunity to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Christian Bueger. I'll just give a short introduction. Dr. Christian Bueger is a professor of international relations at the University of Copenhagen and a research fellow at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. He's the author of Understanding Maritime Security, Oxford University Press 2024 with Timothy Edimon, and has explored questions of international security and global governance in more than 200 publications. He is a regular speaker at the international maritime events and has briefed the United Nations Security Council, the European Parliament, among others. He holds a PhD from the European University Institute. Let me also emphasize some of Professor's key other portfolios. In addition to being Professor of International Relations at the University of Copenhagen, Professor is also a research fellow, an honorary professor at the University of Seychelles, director, the Network for Maritime Security Research, co-chair, Copenhagen Ocean Hub, honorary research fellow, Cardiff University. Today's keynote lecture or presentation is on translating research, making practitioners think. The ideas travel, evolve, and provoke strategic reflections among those tasked with decision making. It is a theme that resonates deeply with our own efforts here in the Maldives and across the Indian Ocean. So, I will kindly invite Professor Bueger to the stage. Before that, Professor will speak for 30 minutes, and then I will open the floor for the audience. As moderator, I, Atullah Rashid from MNU, will be providing a running note through the session to capture key insights and facilitate engagements. I encourage all participants to listen actively and contribute thoughtfully. Without further ado, I give you the floor, Professor. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the kind words. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and a big thank you to the university for all the hospitality. It's my very first time in the Maldives. It's not my first time in a small island state, but the first time here. So before coming here, I was wondering, how does Maldives compare to other places that I have been to? Is it like Seychelles? Is it like Sri Lanka? Is it like the Shetland Island? And yesterday, while exploring the island for the first time, I recognized what it reminded me of the most: Venice. The Maldives is a collection of canals, of bridges, I've learned, of boats, but also fantastic food. And let's not forget that the medieval Venice was also a melting pot of people from different countries coming together, and it was also a place for contemplation, for arts, and for great scholarship. And I see this very well reflected here in the program of this conference, which is indeed a melting pot of different disciplines, of different perspectives, and I very, very much look forward to attend as many panels over the next days. When I got the invitation to speak here, I was thinking, oh wow, this is a broad theme, evolving paradigms, merging research, evidence, and practice. What can I bring you that could be useful across disciplines? What can I actually talk about? And this led me to today's talk, and I titled this 8 minutes, and I explain to you later on what it has, why it is 8 minutes. Translating research, making practitioners think. Because I think this is actually the most important thing that academics should care about. How can we translate the amazing research that we're doing into actions, into policies? And sometimes this is not possible. And what we can achieve at the very minimum is actually make other people think, right? So they, after listening to us, they think a little bit differently. So, in the next couple of minutes, I try to address a couple of really big questions. How can academic research actually be translated into policy, into practice? And how can we enhance the reflexivity and the quality of public policy debates in whatever our field is? And quite obviously, I need to work with a little bit of evidence, so I like to draw on my own research on maritime security and global ocean politics. And my idea is to tease out a little bit of methodology or general ideas that perhaps all of you find useful in one way or the other. And I like to end with some conclusions for the academics in the room, but I also like to end with what follows from that for diplomats and security policy makers and what they actually can take away from that. And then hopefully we are going to have more than enough time for your questions. But please remember, I'm also around for the next 2 days, so please approach me in the coffee breaks over lunch and so on. Now let's get started. And I would like to not start in the abstract. I'll come to theory in a couple of minutes, but start out from what is the state of global ocean governance. That is the big context within which I work. Now, in many ways, 2025 so far was an amazing year for the ocean, because in comparison, there was quite unprecedented global attention on problems of the ocean. And here you have, on the slides, you have some examples. In April, we had the 10th Our Ocean Conference, and that was held in Korea. It was already the 10th. Big diplomatic spectacle with lots of commitments, with ministers and NGOs. Maldives was also there. Then the follow-up to that was the 3rd UN Ocean Conference. That was in Nice. More than 15,000 people attended this one. So a lot of momentum. At the same time, if you read the closing document of that conference, it's rather meh. We already knew these things, and one of the conclusions that came out of the conference, the Sustainable Development Goals that are linked to the ocean will not be reached. So that's a bit sad story, but we need to probably come up with new goals that we can actually achieve. So a lot of people in the ocean community know about these events and also what is driving them, including the biodiversity goal of 30 by 30, including the new treaty on the oceans. We have a new United Nations treaty, an implementation treaty of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, often called the BBNJ treaty. So there's a lot of momentum for the oceans. Something else also happened this year. For the second time ever, the United Nations Security Council actually convened a high-level open debate to discuss maritime security. And the first one was convened by Greece, and that was with the intention that there have been so many maritime security problems, piracy, terrorism, illegal fishing, and so on, but they are being dealt with in a rather bit-by-bit manner, rather than from a broader strategic perspective. And that motivated the first UN Security Council debate. That was in May. And over 100 nations actually took the floor, and they almost all said the same. It was a remarkable global maritime security consensus put on this point. Last week, Monday, Tuesday, there was the second UN Security Council debate on maritime security, and we can expect more to follow. In the second debate, what came out clearly was a commitment for developing a new institution within the UN Security Council. So there are remarkable, interesting things actually happening on the global stages. An amazing year for the ocean, perhaps. It was most certainly an amazing year for me, because I got the opportunity to actually give a briefing at the UN Security Council. That doesn't happen very often in an academic's life, and I received the invitation 2 weeks before the actual debate, and it was totally over the moon. Yeah, life goal achieved. And I started to tell everyone, I'm going to speak at the UN Security Council. And then very quickly I thought, but what am I going to say? And then the Greek mission told me, you have 8 minutes. I've been working on maritime security for the last 15 years. What am I going to say in 8 minutes? So this is also why I titled this talk 8 minutes, and I'll come to how I tried to answer this question. What are we going to say as academics in these 8 minutes? Think for yourself. You get the invitation to the biggest forum you can imagine, and then you get 8 minutes. What are you going to say? How are you even going to decide what are you going to say? So I'll come back to the 8-minute question in a bit. Before we go there, I would like to give you a little bit of a teaser on why all of this attention for the oceans are actually needed. Why do we need more security scholarship on the oceans? Why do we need a UN ocean meeting? And the reason for that is that the oceans are in big, big trouble. And one way to look at this is through this amazing graph that Swedish researchers came up with. And I give you 20 seconds of my precious time just to study it. So this is a graph that tries to quantify the amount of maritime activities and how they have been accelerating over the last 30 years. And what we can see in this graph is that something radically happens in the 1990s. Oceanic activity across all these domains, whether it's tourism, whether it's energy, whether it's marine protected areas, massively accelerated. What does it mean? It means the oceans are becoming an increasingly crowded space, and some people even talk about the oceans as an industrialized space. More wind farms, more cables, more boats, more shipping, and so on. So this is a major development. So we cannot think about the oceans anymore in the same categories as we did so in the 1960s and 70s, including when the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea was concluded in 1982. Indeed, you can say, not only in the Maldives, but everywhere in the world, we are now dependent as much on the oceans as we have never ever been before in human history. And this is perhaps the most important background condition for why we need maritime security. Because the more we depend on the ocean, the more we are facing vulnerabilities. And I just give you two examples for these vulnerabilities. The first one, probably almost everyone in the room knows. And how many people in the room have actually shared a meme or a tweet about the evergreen? A couple of people. So this was a really fascinating event because a single ship in a strategic location shut down the global economy for several days. And economists rightfully have called this a world loss event. Billions of dollars were lost over these couple of days because of a single ship got stuck in a strategic location. That tells us about what these vulnerabilities are. The second incident took place last year, also in the Red Sea, and perhaps not as many people will have noted it. The Houthi forces attacked the vessel Ruby Mar. The engine caught fire. The crew was rescued, but the vessel was left drifting. And while drifting, the vessel cut 4 subsea data cable connections. Subsea data cable connections are the key infrastructure through which our data and internet runs. Without a subsea data cable, Maldives wouldn't have proper internet and for sure not 5G. So the Red Sea is not only a superhighway for shipping, it is also a superhighway for data connections. So when the Houthi forces attack shipping in the Red Sea, they not only threaten international shipping, but also global connectivity. And last but not least, the ship also sank. It carries fertilizers, and if that fertilizer is released, we are probably no longer going to call the Red Sea, but rather the Green Sea or the Green-Blue Sea, because we all know what happens if we release fertilizer into this. So these are the kind of issues that we are talking about when looking into maritime security. But perhaps the best book on maritime security in the Maldives came out actually yesterday by a very prominent author sitting right next to me. It's called Maldives and Small State Security. So have a look at it, an amazing piece. If it comes to my own research, in 2024 we released 2 major publications that is all written with colleagues, and one is a report with the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, and that is available for free on the UNIDIR website. And the other one is a book with Oxford University Press called Understanding Maritime Security. And this one you can best get via Amazon India, and don't get it via the UK, get it via India, and it's like $9 or so. So both of these publications were attempts that were going on for quite a long time and actually consolidate different types of maritime security research. And the UNIDIR report is also partially behind the story of me getting my 8 minutes. But before I jump into these 2 publications, I would very briefly like to drag you into the world of philosophy of science and the world of methodology. Don't worry, it's not going to be complicated. Ask me the complicated questions in the Q&A. Happy to talk more about this in a minute. So let's move to theory and methodology. What is it that actually underlines my work, and how could it be useful for you as well? Now, there's a famous science and technology scholar who later on started to head a business school in the UK, and his name is Stevie Bueger. And Stevie Bueger made a very important contribution when he wrote a big reflective piece on how ideas, how science influences policy. Here's what Bueger argued. He said there are three major ways of thinking about this question. The first one is what we very often teach at school, and sometimes it also underlies university work, and he called it romanticism. And romanticism is the idea that all it requires is an amazing academic idea, really good research, solid methodologies, and then, because of the quality of that knowledge, it will travel and everyone will be convinced. Right? The knowledge is so good, how could anyone disagree? Right? This idea is so fantastic, how could it not inspire other people? That is the basic romantic idea. Bueger continued in arguing, well, but a lot of people recognize that it doesn't really work. They had great ideas in the past, there have been done super good research, but no one paid attention to it. And these people usually develop a sort of what he called modified romanticism. And that's basically the argument that, ideas are very powerful in their own right. Good knowledge is all what matters, right? But the knowledge needs a little push, right? And then you'll find actually a lot of literature on making that argument, and then you're supposed to write op-eds, post a lot of stuff on social media, make sure not to use complicated words that other people don't understand, right? Make sure to do workshops around your idea and knowledge, so it actually is being influenced by practice and so on. So these are all very, very valid ideas, but they still hinge on the idea of romanticism, right? That it's the ideas and not the humans and the social networks that actually matter. So one alternative is pragmatism, and that originates in the thought of William James and John Dewey, US pragmatism, but also contemporaries such as Bruno Latour and indeed also Steve Bueger that came up with the romanticism perspective. Now, one of the basic points here is it's a little bit more complicated. Sorry, it's a classical academic argument, right? It's a bit more complicated. So what I would like to propose to investigate and use as a methodology basically operates with two key concepts. One is the idea of resonance, right? And that is basically the idea that knowledge is being picked up if it can be heard and understood. Right? Think about resonance. That's an acoustic metaphor. Right? Think about something that is really noisy and awful. Think about something that is below the threshold of what humans can hear. Think about something that sounds like a pop song. Think about something that sounds like relaxation. So knowledge has kind of similar effects, and it depends in many ways on the situation and context, whether something is being perceived as noise, right? Whether it's not loud enough, right? Whether it is considered to be a pop song, whether it is considered to be a sleeping sound. Right? I'm hopefully not resonating to you as a sleeping sound. So this is the first core concept here. The second one is the question, what do we actually mean by knowledge, and what is it that is supposed to resonate? And here I think we need to be a little bit more precise rather than talking about knowledge or ideas or evidence. These are usually the words that we use. And I would like to invite you to use the concept of the epistemic object, right? So an object is something concrete, something that is often very material. And by saying that it's epistemic is meant it contains knowledge or it represents knowledge. That's an idea that comes from a Swiss sociology of science, science scholar Karin Knorr-Cetina, and a German philosopher of physics that has written very complicated things, Hans-Jörg Reinberger. The idea of epistemic objects. Now let me explain that a little bit before then coming to a couple of examples of how I'm trying to use that in my maritime security scholarship. Now, when we're thinking about resonance, one of the key drivers that we need to understand is that resonance depends on different kind of situations. So basically when we're sitting here in this room, something else resonates than in the coffee break outside. If you're among military practitioners, something else will resonate than when you're sitting in a diplomatic meeting, and so on. So it's very, very important to understand what kind of situation you're actually trying to reach, where you're trying to have resonance. And situation is an interesting concept because it's relatively open in scale and scope. Situation can mean here and now, in this room. But it can also refer to a broader political context, like global ocean politics, what I introduced you to earlier, right? The discussions in 2025, that in many ways is also a political situation. Now, one of the key insights from pragmatism is to distinguish between situations of routine, that's like you brushing your teeth in the morning. I hope everyone does that for the collective benefit, right? And you do that every morning. You don't really think about it, right? And resonance there probably would mean you get a new, a tastier toothpaste or something like that. Then you have situations of choice. That's not like toothbrushing because you don't think about in the morning, should I brush my teeth or not? At least I don't. So. But these are kind of like deliberate political choices, right? Should I pursue a career as a doctor or as a diplomat? And what is required in these kind of situations are actually epistemic objects that provide options, scenarios, decision-making aids. And the third one are crisis moments. And in crisis moments, it's not fully clear how to proceed, what you should do. That can be a life crisis, that can be a technological breakdown, and many people are arguing that today we are living in a situation of polycrisis, but I would urge you to be a little bit cautious and be more precise also about what you think is a crisis moment and not. The key point about a crisis moment being that routines break down and choices are not clear. So you need a different epistemic object for that situation, something that provides guidance and orientation. So this is basically an invitation for you when you want to engage with practice to always think about what kind of situation am I actually addressing. Now, last point on theory, and then I jump into back to the oceans. What am I talking about in looking at these epistemic objects, and which ones are powerful? First one are facts and numbers. There's a lot of sociology of quantification, for instance, that clearly shows if you have numbers, it doesn't matter whether they are kind of like accurate or not, they suggest certainty. And a good example in the ocean world is 30 by 30. A lot of people, I assume, have heard about this. The Biodiversity Convention's goal, by 2030, we protect 30% of the oceans. 30 by 30, everyone knows what to do. All right. It's clear mission, certain. All right. Good example for that. The second one are concepts. And concepts are a really interesting entity because they're super important for organizing our thought. They are super important for grasping reality in different ways. And a very good example for that is actually the career of the concept of blue economy. Very recent, 15 years ago, no one was talking about it. A major new way of thinking about how we can combine sustainable development and resource exploitation under the same header. Redescriptions, narratives are another important tool. Telling a story that we think that we know in very different terms. Last but not least, and this is my favorite category, are models and thinking tools, and that are usually invitations to deal with complexity. And I'll come back to these in a couple of minutes. So then the key question for your research, if you want to have resonance, should always be, what kind of epistemic object, what of these things am I actually producing? And instead of only starting out from a research question or something like that, or from curiosity, always think from the start, what will come out of that? Is it a concept? How will it be useful? Don't think about this coming at the end. That is modified romanticism, right? So think about it from the beginning. How much time do we have left? 10 minutes. Okay. Then let me now jump to practice and give you a couple of examples of how I'm trying to use these concepts, and hopefully it will offer some inspiration to you. The first example I'd like to provide you is the concept of blue crime. Some people in the room might have heard about it, others probably not. Now, blue crime is basically an attempt to cluster different forms of crimes at sea, like illicit fishing, smuggling, and so on, and in a systematic way. And when we developed this concept of blue crime, me and my colleague Tim Edmonds from the University of Bristol, we basically started out from the recognition that there's something wrong how we are talking about crimes at sea at the moment. And that was, first of all, hardly anyone looked at how different crimes at sea are connected with each other. So you needed to have a sort of common umbrella. Then secondly, a lot of the discussion was on the concept of transnational organized crime at sea and on the legal definition under the Vienna Convention. The problem, however, with the legal definition is that you only include what is actually criminalized under law, but not what actually does harm to people. And that was one of the core arguments for developing the concept. We need to pay more attention when we're talking about crime to things that are not criminalized under law, but should be. Right? And for that, then we need a new concept, and this led us to the concept of blue crime. It's deliberately called blue because you might have noted that if you call something blue, people kind of like it. So think about using a color for your concept. It's the green economy, it's the blue economy, and so on. And the concept is, in essence, a new definition of crime, but it also then came along with an epistemic artifact, and that is then here the table you can see on the right. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but it's basically the attempt to think about different forms of harm. The second example is from the publication that the most people might have seen in the maritime security world, and that basically was to develop a matrix on what maritime security actually stands for. And here the key challenge was that a lot of people started to talk about maritime security, but they couldn't agree. And there's no official definition of maritime security or whatsoever, but there was a lot of different versions of maritime security around, and I started to go to meetings, and people were fighting over what is the better definition of maritime security. And I was like, don't waste your time with this. It's in the nature of concepts that they are contested. But the responses I got to that is, we cannot just stop talking about it. And then I thought, okay, there must be a better way of how to help people in their struggle and organizing the discussion a little bit of what they are talking about when they are saying maritime security. And what is particularly important here is, given that maritime security is a relatively recent concept, how it connects to older discussions. And these older discussions are protection of the marine environment, economic development, human security, and then also national security and sea power. So I put these in the corner of a piece of paper and started thinking about, okay, how do different nations actually define issues of maritime security in relation to these older concepts? And that basically provides a sort of point of orientation. Now you can look at and compare different understandings of maritime security, not only across countries, but also, very important, across agencies involved in maritime security and across political parties, for instance. So here, basically, the epistemic object is a visual aid. It's an invitation to people that look at it to think for themselves, right? And it is also the attempt to map divergences. Now I already got the warning sign, 5 minutes, and I haven't spoken about my 8 minutes yet. So. Okay, coming back to the 8 minutes. I try to approach this in a similar way. Here, quite obviously, the epistemic object is the speech, it's the 8 minutes itself. My core argument here in these 8 minutes was the need for the Council to engage in the development of a new institutional mechanism. And I was super delighted that this then also got picked up by many delegations in the next debate of last week. And there's a particular need for the UN to get engaged in that, exactly because we have an institutional fragmentation, and we need to recalibrate and bring together UN voices. Now, if you have nothing else to do tonight, go on UN Web TV, watch the speech, and you'll see a lot of attempts by me to kind of like grapple with UN Security Council routine. In a UN Security Council speech, for instance, every 2 minutes you say, Mr. President. So there are particular kind of things that you need to do to be accepted as a UN Security Council speech. I also toy around with new concepts, including the blue acceleration that I already showed you earlier. Probably now it's 3 minutes. A couple of takeaway points. First, for academics, I would like to invite you to start your thinking about what kind of research you want to carry out and spend your time on from the question, where can your research actually resonate? And that in many ways is linked to you having a very good understanding of what the problematic situation is, and a sort of design plan across your research for what kind of epistemic object you want to come out of it. Right? What's at the end of the research? Don't leave this to the end, but start out from the question, you know. After I've spent 2 years on this, you know, will it be a new concept, a table, a typology, new data? What is it going to be? And how is it going to resonate for what kind of situation? So you can concretely plan actually like that. It's not abstract. So that's the takeaway for academics. In many ways, however, this is also a methodology for small island states. It's not only useful for academics. And if you think about this from the angle of foreign policy, I think what is implied here is, first of all, that small states need to monitor problematic situations together with academics. Probably for smaller actors, choice and crisis situations are better to intervene. Foreign policy decision makers probably should reach out to academics, because academics are really good in making epistemic objects. This is what we do. Right? And these are really useful within the world of global politics. And I think two good examples are how Seychelles actually in the early days pioneered the blue economy through its president, and is also globally known, you know, as a blue economy nation because of that. Another more recent one is how the Bahamas are trying to push through the concept of zones for peace. I think the other big consequence for all of that is also the importance of actually using academic thoughts throughout all of diplomacy, and whether you then call that informal science or track 2 diplomacy is up to you. I'm gonna leave it here, and just last slide, have a look at the book, and you might also want to follow my newsletter. I just started it, and it's called Turbulent Seas. And I thank you so much for your attention. I hope you found this useful in one way or the other. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bueger. And I wouldn't waste time analyzing your work, but I will open up the floor for the audience. We have 10 minutes. We'll take questions. I think I'll take 3 by 3. 3 questions at a time. Please keep the question short, to the point. Rather than discussing a topic, please ask the question related to the speech. Thank you very much. Is there?
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much, Professor Christian, for that fascinating account of evolution of ocean governance and maritime security, and providing a recipe for research. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Arts, and I happen to be the fortunate coordinator when the university organized for the first time in 2023 the Ocean Governance Symposium. And we are hoping to have second one by the end of this year or early next year. So it's very timely to listen to your interesting conversation. In fact, our Vice Chancellor, myself and the team, we traveled to Japan to study their expertise in ocean governance, management of ocean governance. And we are looking forward very much that the Maldives could be the secretariat for the newly adopted treaty, High Seas Treaty. I hope we could be the secretariat located in the Maldives as a 100% ocean state. My question, by the way, we are looking at drafting a national umbrella act for ocean governance and maritime security in the Maldives. So what would be the attention points that you would like to focus us on in drafting this National Umbrella Act covering management and governance of oceans and maritime security in the Maldives? Thank you very much.
One or two more questions. There's one. Please kindly help with the mic. Thank you. There's also one. No, that's okay. It's okay. Yep. I think it just works. Yes. No, I think it's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bueger. Just very quickly, on your presentation of routine, choice, and crisis as a model of what is ahead of us, it would seem to me in a planetary crisis, notably defined by climate change, for instance, or rising sea levels, wouldn't you say that routine is really no longer an option, and even choices are becoming fewer and fewer? How does this model hold up when we have to work essentially on a planet in crisis? Is that an opportunity or is that a problem?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There's one more back of the stage. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a very good presentation. It was very insightful. Found it very interesting. My name is Fizal. I been working with the ocean conservation programs for a while, and 30 by 30 is a very interesting concept. It's been approved by Maldives, and I think a Maldivian version of it's been adopted as well. I feel there, at the global stage, there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of defining what we mean by protection. Because I feel there needs to be consistency between nations, between countries on how a place is being protected. Some Maldivians would argue the whole of Maldives has been protected, is being protected, because there are certain fisheries which is restricted here in Maldives. Well, some in other countries would also say there are protected zones, saying certain fisheries, certain oil related work is restricted. So my question is there a global effort to objectively define levels of protection? Or can anyone just claim that it's protected without it actually meaning the same for the others? Thanks.
Thank you very much for that question. Professor Bueger, are you happy to take the questions?
Oh, so many, so easy questions.
Yeah, thank you.
So, no problem probably I have like 3 minutes, so 1 minute each. A big thank you for all three of these. Perhaps starting with the ocean governance question, I'm super delighted to hear that Maldives put itself forward actually to host the Secretariat. If it comes to national terms, what we can see in our research is that there's often a disconnect between those who care about the environment and who care about security and who care about the economic. I call that the oceanic disconnect. And a classical example for that being that coast guards are not considered as stakeholders in marine spatial planning. Although they are a key stakeholder, because how can you have a marine protected areas without anyone enforcing the law, right? But this is hardly ever the case. And you can see the oceanic disconnect the most dramatic in the recent European Union Ocean Pact, where they want to develop this comprehensive perspective on the ocean, and then they have one chapter on conservation, they have one on ocean literacy, one on blue economy, one on maritime security, and one on ocean governance. And in each of these chapters, they lay out projects which have hardly anything to do with each other. Right? So for instance, the Maritime Security chapter has a proposal for a big European-wide drone network. But it's totally unclear whether this drone network will contribute to conservation, whether there will be any economic benefits from it. So this is this classical disconnect, and I would see that as an absolute priority in developing a governance policy or GAP. Do not think about ocean governance being something separated from these other things, but as the big umbrella. And given that the European Union failed terribly, you can see that it's not an easy challenge. But it's probably easier as a small island state. Routine choices crisis. The model is actually, I can make it more complex, but I skipped over that. Then it becomes actually 9 different situations. And yes, we all talk rhetorically about polycrisis and crisis moments, but for instance, if you look into the climate change regime, right, there the problem is rather that we're not operating in a crisis moment, but we are just moving from one COP to the next, right? So the challenge is rather how to have an impact on the climate change negotiation, considering that it's now fully into a routine moment. Right? So it always requires a little bit of analysis to figure out what is routine, what is crisis, what is choice, and it doesn't reveal itself that easily. I love the comment about protection. Right? So one of the big projects that we are running in Copenhagen at the moment is on critical maritime infrastructure protection. Right? And protection, quite obviously, is a different concept than security. It's a different concept than safety. It's a different concept than resilience. And it's a different concept than care. But somehow it incorporates all of these elements, right? And probably it is the closest to resilience, an ecosystem or an infrastructure being capable to survive external shocks, whether that's coral bleaching or things like that. But also caring, right? In the sense of caring for, right? Paying attention to how well an infrastructure or an ecosystem is doing, how it can be nourished and things like that. But I fully agree, it would be needed and an interesting exercise perhaps to develop a matrix like the maritime security matrix for protection, right? Rather than following the idea that there should be this one single definition. It's better to actually map divergence and invite people to reflect upon what understanding of protection they are actually working with.
Much. We have like 30 seconds.
Oh, that's fine. That's enough for 10 questions.
Yeah, that's enough for 10 questions. I'm just being cautious of time because there are parallel sessions happening, around on this conference. So if you could keep it very short.
Professor, my name is Hassan. It's very interesting. I saw about the Suez Canal, the incidents I monitored very closely during this period. Do you think globalization has an impact on marine security? Or does it have a more positive or negative impact on marine security?
Yeah.
Last question.
That's a very short one. Yeah, thank you.
Well, in many ways, we have too many organizations that are not doing enough. So, and that's a sort of conundrum that we're basically looking at. On the one side, there's a patchwork that needs better coordination, and on the other side, there are also gaps out there. And this is exactly what I mean with recalibration, right? Careful thinking of, do we have the right setup? What are the gaps, and where can we do much better? But thank you to everyone for staying until the end. I know there are overlapping panels now, so
yes, thank you.
Thank you
So much. Thank you so much, Professor Bueger. Please, just one more item a very quick item in the list. Can I kindly invite our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Aisha Shehnaz Adam, to present a token of appreciation to Professor Bueger. Thank you very much.